Let's begin. Good morning, everyone. I'm Isabel Perez Marina. I'm president of the Florida Association of Community Corrections, and I'm very excited to welcome you on behalf of FACC and all the directors of the board to Courageous Conversations Part 2, a panel discussion titled Conversations for Change, Who Move My Lens. This is the second part of FACC's three-part webinar series on race, equity, and justice. Our first session asks you to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. We encourage you to look inward and identify and understand implicit bias. The session encouraged meaningful dialogue among peers. I, for one, took the Harvard implicit bias test and was surprised with what I learned about myself. Each of us is tasked with doing the hard work, and it is perhaps the most effective way to start the road to change. While in the first session, we asked you to begin to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, to get used to this idea, today we'll be asking you to take it a step further and really allow that discomfort in. As we prepared for today's webinar, there was a moment when all of us realized that we cannot let the discomfort stop the conversation. It's in that moment that we have to channel our courage and keep going. After all, that is where change occurs. In the midst of us bringing you this second session, our country continues to struggle, and we are witnessing more unrest, confusion, and pain after the shooting of Jacob Blake. Today's focus is meant to give us a perspective of how we got here. Perhaps if we understand that, we can better work together, regardless of race, creed, and politics, to reach a common goal: a free, safe, and just society for everyone. Before I turn it over to our distinguished moderator and panelists, I really want to go through some housekeeping items. The first, as you saw today when we were letting you in, it's really important to keep your video and audio off on mute, and this will allow for the best experience for all participants. Also, if you click on the speaker view button on the top right of your screen and you hide non-video participants, it'll provide the best screen experience as well. If you have any questions about how to do all that, just message me privately in the chat and we'll see if we could provide you with some tech support. Speaking of the chat, if you click on your chat button, a window will open, and we encourage you to submit your comments and questions through the chat. You can send those directly to Michael Anderson or myself as well, and we'll be feeding these to the moderator later in the session. Please note that the moderator and panelists are independent presenters that have agreed to volunteer their time to FACC. They cannot answer questions relating to any one organization, but will certainly answer general questions made. As noted earlier, this webinar and chat will be recorded, and the link to the recording will be posted on the FACC website very soon. And so now I am extremely proud to introduce our distinguished panel and moderator. We have someone whom many of you will know, Corliss Campbell. She has served as the Circuit Administrator in Tampa for the Florida Department of Corrections. Prior to her appointment as Circuit Administrator, she served as Deputy Circuit Administrator. She has over 31 years of experience working all levels of community corrections. And Ms. Campbell has trained several in the field on issues relating to restorative justice, human diversity, women's history, and rainbow cultural trainings. These trainings and her leadership led her circuits to receive numerous awards and accolades. We welcome Ms. Campbell here today. Dr. Randy Nelson currently serves as the Director of Bethune-Cookman University in the Criminal Justice Administration Graduate Program Center for Law and Social Justice within the College of Liberal Arts. Mr. Nelson holds a PhD in criminology from Florida State University. He is a nationally recognized law enforcement training consultant in the areas of community policing and engagement strategies. As the coordinator of the Florida Historically Black Colleges and Universities Law Enforcement Training and Recruitment Symposiums, he has worked collaboratively with the Florida Sheriff's Association and the Florida State Conference of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples to hold law enforcement and community engagement town hall forums across the state. Welcome, Dr. Nelson. From my hometown in Miami, Florida, though I cannot be credited for finding her, Dr. Shirley Planton is the Chief Executive for U-Turn Youth Consulting. She is the author of Backstory of a New Reality. She's a member of the Florida Gang Investigators Association. She provides intervention and advocacy for youth and families dealing with complex systems and institutions like the criminal justice system. And she facilitates training surrounding Black backstories contributing to urban youth and gun violence, courageous conversations beyond diversity, our youth state of emergency, backstories matter, youth violence as public health issues, just to name a few. She's been recognized locally and nationally for her leadership, vision, commitment, and dedication to issues regarding youth and gun violence and the prevention of juvenile delinquency. Dr. Planton holds an executive juris doctorate from Concord School of Law. And last but not least, our moderator, Ms. Paula Hoisington. Ms. Hoisington is the Senior Vice President on Policy and Government Affairs for Net Communications. Prior to this leadership position in the private sector, Ms. Hoisington served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Community Corrections and a National Auditor for the American Correction Association. She is a national expert on corrections policy. She currently serves as chairwoman, and hold your breath, chairwoman of the Central Florida Urban League Board, chairwoman of the Corporate Roundtable, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, chairwoman of South Lake Lake Achievers, chairwoman of the Business Council National African American Mayors Association, vice chairwoman of the Abraham Johnson Legacy Foundation. She was the top African American female executive at the gubernatorial level, serving under the leadership of 2 governors. Ms. Hoisington served on the transition team for Governor Bush, Governor Scott, Governor DeSantis, and Mayor Jory Demings. She was recently named to the statewide subcommittee on accountability and societal change by the Florida Police Chiefs Association. We are in great company. And I'd like to welcome and thank our panelists and moderator and turn it over to Ms. Hoisington. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Isa. Good morning to everyone that has decided to join us in this conversation, Who Moved My Lens? As we begin the conversation and we think about who moved my lens, I think it's accurate for us to say that we all want a safe, nurturing environment to live, to work, to play. The question that I'm asking you this morning is that as you go through life, how do you go through your lens? What do you see in your lens? And I'm sure that you want the same for those that you interact with. If we're honest with ourselves, recent events in our nation have impacted our view regarding race, justice, and equality. Today, our panelists will share with you information, experiences that we hope will help you build a culture of trust within your agencies, a culture of inclusion, both personally and professionally, and it helps you to reach out to ensure that others around you can clearly understand the view that's coming through their lens. We're going to start out this morning with a short video. And when you look at this video, I want you to pay close attention to how 2 different individuals looking through their lens, and we end up with a result that may not have been intended. Mike, if you can cue the video.
So.
Thank you. So as you see on the screen, what behind your eyes holds more power than what is in front of them. When we look through with culture and social problems and through our individual lenses, What did the person do to deserve his or her specific circumstances? But do we know the history, the policy, the culture, the factors beyond the individual choices that have gotten us here today when we look through our individual lenses? Dr. Nelson, when we talk about the video and we look through lenses, we recognize that different audiences need different messages, different resources. When we engage in topics around race, racism, racial injustice, criminal justice reform, because people are in different places when it comes to their understanding and their willingness to talk about the issue, to have that uncomfortable conversation. Can you give us some opening remarks on your thoughts? And then talk to our audience about how can those working in community corrections field recognize the differences in their lens, and more important, how can they be more effective with the population in which they serve?
Thank you very much, Ms. Argentina. Good morning, everyone. I think this is a needed and necessary conversation, and the lens aspect of it, I think, will be fleshed out as we continue. But born and raised in Wakulla County, Florida, that's not Wakanda, but Wakulla. Country boy on a dirt road, double wide trailer with 12 of us in it. The lens in which I see the world is through my lived and shared experiences. That's not deficient, but it's different. So recognizing that our lived and shared experiences are different, but not deficient. So we start there. The second aspect of it is, as a 54-year-old black male, my eyes are different now. I have corrective lenses. So things that I used to could see or require some corrections, that'll be a part of this conversation. And the third thing is getting beyond. I know we're more divisive now as a country and as a people as we've been since the civil rights. I think we've gotten away from collective efficacy, where we're working together collectively to you choose a side, and whichever side you choose, the other side is the bad guy. So we have to destroy, not that they have any points that are valid.
You got them.
Destroy. So the conversation today is just that. I think the video, although it haven't come across the way we would like, the video was the young man in the truck saw the gentleman pushing it, what he thought was pushing his car, and the gentleman was actually stretching. Sometimes based on what we see, we come up with a remedy or a strategy for someone that's completely different than what that person intended or needed. As community correction professional and my time as a probation and parole guy in South St. Petersburg, there were a lot of times that I prescribed something, what I thought that person needed. And in their situation and circumstance, it was completely the opposite. But it was based on my lens and view as a black male from Wakulla County, Florida, growing up in rural North Florida versus St. Petersburg, an urban environment, and the obstacles and barriers that those individuals, I didn't understand, but I was trying to give them a prescription without having an understanding and awareness of that. And I think as community corrections professional, both residential or in the community, I think we have to understand the people we're trying to help, regardless of whether they're on probation, parole, or they're in residential confinement, they're going to go back to the community. We have to have a better understanding of awareness of the struggles, the barriers. So not that we have to agree with them or have experienced them, but I think we have to have an awareness of them before we can help them. So today, for me, this conversation, I think, will cover a myriad of issues and platforms, whether we're talking about race, gender, political persuasion, religious. I think any and everything starts with the understanding that our commonality is that we want a safe and nurturing environment to raise our family. How do we get there? Collectively. Although we do have individual goals and aspirations, that shouldn't supersede the collective efficacy of we as a people, or we the people. So I look forward to the conversation, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. You said something that I want to just dig just a little bit further. When you talk about awareness, That's, to me, that seems like the key factor, right? So how do we get folks to the point of being aware that their view through their lens is different, and because of that difference, their interaction, their responses impact folks in a different way?
Oh, absolutely. No, I think that's an excellent point. At Bethune-Cookman University, we have students from across the country. And I have a 12-year-old and a 19-year-old that I love more than life itself. So in my attempt to prepare them for whatever career or future they have, education is core and paramount. So I don't let them play sports or anything unless the grades are right. So all of those things are how I prepare my children. I also recognize that there are others that don't have some of the resources, opportunities that I've had, whether you call them privileges or whatever you call them. The things that I provide my kid, I would do regardless of who my kids are, or I would do those things. Recognizing that when I came to Bethune-Cookman University, that I have students that didn't start from the same line. If it was a race, they didn't start the same place as my kid. So when I'm trying to teach and mentor and develop them, I can't use the lens of which I raise my kids. Although that should be the standard for all, I recognize that there are privileges and rights that I've afforded my kids. And whether we're talking about white privilege, whether we're talking about class privilege, whatever those privileges are, recognizing that we have them. That doesn't make me any worse of a parent because I've done those things. But I also recognize that others don't. And a part of this collective efficacy is that everybody can start the race at the same place. So the lens and the awareness is just that. I don't think we have to get into a debate of who's more privileged than others. But self-preservation dictates that I want my kids to succeed, and I'll do whatever I can, but I'm not willing to hold down your kids for my kids to succeed. And I think as a country, we're there now. It's when you choose the sides, you want to choose the winners and losers, as opposed to make the environment where everyone can compete on an equal playing field. We're not there yet. I mean, but that's what we should aspire to.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Corliss, as I stated earlier, recent events have shown that this conversation has been long overdue. Communities around the world have taken to social media, to the streets to protest the unlawful, unjust treatment that occurs in individuals, what it seems to be based on race. 2020, instead of being known for that perfect vision, is showing us it's a time for change, and to realize that all the factors that play to institute the much needed change. From the view of your lens, please give us some opening remarks, and in your opinion, what's that first step that we need to take to bring about the social justice, to bring about having the conversation so that we can continue to move this country forward, so that we can, 2020, everybody sees that as the perfect vision, right? So how do we may not get to perfect, but how do we improve the vision of how we see things, how we relate to things, how we process things, and how we ensure justice in our country? How do we take that first step?
Okay, good morning. Being the product of equitable recruitment with the Florida Department of Corrections, I was hired in 1983, and I met two components of that recruitment. And one being that I am African American, and the second being that I am a female. So that was an opportunity that I was afforded to be able to be hired with the Department of Corrections. Now, had that recruitment strategy not be in place, who knows, I might not even be an impact with the Florida Department of Corrections. While I do have a college degree from University of South Florida, it's just that it opened the door and gave me that opportunity. What happened next was up to me and how much work I was willing to put into this career. Now, the one thing that I see as a factor for all of us to help us better understand one another, and that is training. Training is so key, and which is why I had no problem with being involved with training when I was working for the Department of Corrections. Training offers professional development of the individual on the areas where we may have shortcomings. When we come into this community corrections career, we don't necessarily know all of the things we may face and even how to deal with those things. But education, training helps refine our skill set. The other part to the training is it must be a unified effort. And that will be to include upper management. It must start at the top. When things start at the top, we are sure that the agency supports the direction that we are going in. It must also start with new recruitment. As new people come in, they need training on how to deal with diversity. And we need more than just a question on a interview panel to determine our diversity level and the need to improve in that area. It should always be a goal of any agency that wants success without fear and without as many problems as we seem to face. Communication of racial and ethnic diversity does great for us, and it puts us all on equal playing field. And it lets every employee know that whatever they bring to the table is valuable and it's important to the agency that they are employed with. And it helps to refine the things beforehand, before getting into some type of situation where you might have to deal with it from a disciplinary point of view. We should not be at that posture before we are informed about how to live in a diverse world. And it puts us all on the same equal ground versus one group having more leverage than another. And then the other outcome for training is that it should offer solutions and actions. We should have some solutions that we are working towards and some actions that we should be able to implement to help us to even know where we stand. With training, we should lead with shared values. The reality is we all have the same shared values. They may come across as a little differently based on our experiences in life, but we all have shared values that we can work on. When we come from that perspective, I think that more people would be inclined to want to know what's going on and how to go about doing whatever it is that we do. When I think about shared values, I think about there's a commercial out and it involves Kobe Bryant and how he lived in various countries and how he always expected better of himself. And he did the same thing for his children. As a matter of fact, the day when he died in the airplane, he was just being a like a soccer or basketball coach for his daughter. He was taking her to her practice, and he wanted so much for her and her life, and he wanted to be a support in that area. It basically, he made a decision that basically cost him his life. And I guess you might say, well, what does that have to do with diversity? It was a way he reached a great number of people by expecting more for himself, for his family, and other people in life saw that. And he touched a lot of lives in this world. And, you know, a lot of times we say, well, because maybe he was famous, maybe because he had money. Those things are true. He did have those things, but the first thing he had was self-improvement for his own life before he even got the fame and the fortune. We should always use values as a bridge and not a bypass. Society's role in affording a fair chance to everyone. And that's the important thing about looking at our policies and our procedures to see how they are being equitable among all people. We do a fair job in reviewing those items, but sometimes our staff are frankly afraid of making suggestions, and oftentimes they don't want to be criticized when they make the suggestions or viewed as being against whatever it is that we're talking about. So they should be free of tags saying that, okay, because this person made this suggestion, they're viewed as a rebel. Sometimes we have a tendency to do that versus looking at why that suggestion was made. We should know the countercultures. Sometimes people don't want to talk about races because, you know, maybe they might feel like it's a useless case. It's not useless. It's always a good decision to talk about race and to get information about it and to share the information. The one thing we have to be careful of, we should always link it to history. History is the reason why we are where we are today. And when we ignore the history, then we ignore why we are where we are. That is very important. And it's not, our history is the reason why our unemployment rate among Blacks are twice the rate among whites. You might think, well, what is it that the whites know more than the Blacks about employment? That's not necessarily true. And we should revisit our laws and our policies to see what is it that is causing this disparity in unemployment, racial profiling. Those kinds of things is the reason why we are where we are today. And those are the things that we need to revisit in order to get to a better place in our society. So training will help us to deal with those types of subjects.
Thank you, Corliss. When you talk about training, right? So we know that when we go through training as individuals, we bring ourselves. We bring ourselves to the table. We bring ourselves into the training. So what would you recommend someone who is providing training on cultural diversity, on racial injustice, knowing that each individual in your class, at no fault of their own, they bring them. So how do you get them to that point of looking through the lens of having that conversation, looking through the lens to reach the desired result. That they're not, first of all, that they're not reluctant to even go through the training, feeling free and comfortable enough to have that conversation. How do you get them to see that my lens and what I see and what may be needed is different than the person sitting next to me? But our goal is to have a training to where we can all go back and function in harmony, if I'm making myself clear. So how do we within the training, knowing that we bring our individual biases with us based on the environment in which we were raised, and our core beliefs, how do we then work with them in training and make sure that, you know, when you're going through the training, that it's not just a check the box. Because so often, you know, you have your standard requirements that your agency requires. You do your 40-hour training or whatever it is. How do we ensure that it's not just a check the box? Because if we're just checking the box, then I'm just going to buy my time and I really don't have to pay attention to this because I'm going to be who I want to be and I'm going to do what I want to do when I get back to the office.
Right. Well, first of all, one of the primary goals of the training is persuasion. A lot of times we don't really understand the lens of persuasion. Persuasion is meant, first of all, to let people know that all people are equal, and then emphasize society's role in affording a fair chance to everyone. When we review those values that everyone holds a value, and everybody wants equality. We need to move the minds that are more solution-oriented and less skeptical in their ability to do something and to do anything about discrimination. We need to move the mind to being solution-oriented and move in that direction, and let people know that it's a safe environment to make the discussions in, and that there will be no repercussions after the training.
Okay.
You may not be persuaded initially, but with thought and time, you will review it and possibly come along.
Thank you. Dr. Planton, when we look at how we look through our lens and the view in which we see, we must look at respect, reflect, resign. It's vital to approach the view of how we see what's happening around us with respect. To reflect and with resign. Respect the centuries of pain, the centuries of oppression. Respect the multiple perspectives and narratives, those that have been lifted up and those that have been pushed to the ground. Respect for persons that you are engaging with. Dr. Planton, how important is it for us to look at the backstories when we come into moving the lens and really understanding the inequalities of our system? How the backstories, how that history impacts the view through our lens.
Thank you so much, Ms. Blazington. I want to start by being very clear about some things, because as we talk about community correction, the operative word is community. So when we're trying to work with community, there are elements that we can never forget. And oftentimes, because we come to these positions, and I think, you know, Dr. Nelson and Ms. Corliss, I think they addressed many of these things. We're coming from a position of privilege. So we feel as though the people that we're working with oftentimes may not have, you know, they've made some choices that have resulted in where they're in. So I want us to, I just want to list a couple of things to help us really get into this context of this conversation, so that we are all on the same playing field and understand that regardless of our privilege, but for whatever you believe in, I'm gonna leave that open, but for this could have easily been you on the opposite side, right? So I want us to be mindful that desperation is real. We need to be mindful that poverty, homelessness, hunger, addiction, lack of guidance is real. Loss is real. Inequities in the systems and just in our surroundings are real. Racism, systemic injustices, they're real. Situational, or what we like to call from our privileged stance, bad decisions are real. And then there are some times, because we often hear, I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes those things are real. And the fact that we have come through so much of these great trainings that Corliss talks about, or the positions of privilege that Dr. Nelson talks about, we tend to take those things as excuses from the people in which we're working with, right? So we need to be, I want us to understand that in order for this to work, we have to own up to our own privilege. We need to understand as well that because of our privilege and because of how we may have moved, some of the things that have been afforded to us, we often don't afford those same things to other people, right? So when we talk about backstories, and I think that was one of the things that pushed me to write the book. I don't do corrections. I haven't worked in corrections, but I have the privilege, and I always call it a privilege and an honor of serving the kids who may often end up within the correction system, right? So we look at the school to prison pipelines and how those are connected to those criminal justice systems. So my job is to try to prevent, oftentimes, many of our youngsters who may have not been exposed to the privilege that my son has right now. My job is to ensure that they don't ever get into this criminal justice system, to ever have to deal with community corrections. But as we talk about backstories, I tend to often hear when I'm dealing with 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds that are telling you, well, I made that decision, miss, because there wasn't nobody there to tell me different. You know, I made that decision, miss, because I ain't have no food. So I had to determine, am I going to go steal to eat or I'm not going to eat? So there are some real decisions that are being made. There's some real backstories that we need to consider, that every person that comes in front of you as part of this community correction isn't a bad person. And those are some terminologies that from our perspective, we like to label people because since they're in the system, you shouldn't have been here anyway. You shouldn't have done anything to be in the system to have to deal with me. So when we talk about backstories, we have to take it one step further to understand that within backstories, we have to address the concept of diversity, which Corliss started addressing very, very beautifully. But when we talk about diversity, let's be honest about it. Diversity has to be more than just color, sex, language, disability, and the things that we often call the checkoff box, what we call your primary characteristics. Those are the things that we as society, we've accepted no problem. Since I got to deal with that, I'm going to deal with that. I can accept it, right? But then you have your secondary characteristics. I like to call the primary characteristics what we see at the bottom of all of our applications and at the bottom of all of our institutional documentation. You know, we do not discriminate based on color, sex, sexual orientation, origin, ethnicity. Those things just basically protect us from, it's a liability. It protects us from a civil rights liability. But now how we implement it is a whole different ballgame. How we actually include people to be at the table, because see, diversity is the beginning of the game, but it's also an ongoing part of the game. Because if you are not being inclusive in who's part of your diversity, it's almost as if you don't have the diversity, right? So then we look at exactly what Corliss was talking about, the change that happens at the top. Who's at the top? Does everybody at the top look exactly like you and I? Does everybody at the top have the exact same background? Does everybody at the top, you know, represent one group of people? Because if that is the case, then how truly can you be representative of an entire association? How truly can you be representative of an entire system? So what do I mean by that? So let me give you an example. If everybody in your decision-making, or what is often called your command staff, if everybody that's making decisions for you are all happily married, they all have college degrees, and we all come from one cluster of the community, then you can't speak to the needs and the desires of a single parent, of a woman who may be going through a divorce, of someone who may not have had the college degree but worked their way on up. The reality is those who are making the decision must represent the people in which they serve, because until that happens, then we are still not as diverse as we really want to be. The reality also is it's not enough to say you're in the room, but am I at the table? Am I respected enough that my voice matters? Because if my voice doesn't matter, then I need not be there. So a part of the problem is, and we have to be honest, Ms. Hoisington, we got to be honest about it. Systemic and systematic racisms are very different. We may agree that there are no such thing as systemic inequities in our, because we work so hard. The police department, the criminal justice, that we've done our part to ensure that we've mitigated systemic racism. But then let's talk about the systematic racism. What are the methodologies that we use to keep people down? As Corliss said, she checked off 2 boxes by being Black and being woman. But then we're living in another world right now. What happened to your LGBTQ community? What happened to your Muslims? What happened to these other vulnerable communities that may not have a voice, but yet we say we're diverse, yet we say we're representative? I want to end by simply saying it's oftentimes there are words that are included in our documentation, right? From the inception of this country, the word of we the people. We the people includes all of us. It can't just mean the people that's at the top. It can't just mean that the people at the top are going to make decisions for everybody else and not include the everybody else. So as I conclude, I want us to be mindful that the work that is being done must be done from a position of not just diversity. It has to be inclusive. It has to be equitable. Equity doesn't say it's enough to be equal, because we like to use the word equal. Equal says I'm safe. I've done my part. But equitable says, does Paula and Corliss, we may be in the same place, but does Randy need a little bit more to move him a little bit further? That's when we begin to be diverse, because now we're considering Randy may just need 2 trainings. Paula may need 5 trainings. Corliss may not need any training at all. But as a system, if we're truly going to be diverse, as a system, if we're going to collectively impact the lives that we serve, we need to be able to move people, meet them where they are, serve them empathetically, and then begin to make the true lasting changes that we want to see in systems that then turn around and impact lasting and progressive communities.
Thank you. So, Dr. Planton, when we look at all of that, right? So when we look at, okay, who's at the table? What are they bringing? What values do they have? Are we being inclusive? When we look at what the role of community corrections, and you're dealing with offenders that come in from all walks of life, like with the different stories.
Right.
And when we look at ourselves of like, oh, when I did that, that was just a mistake. But be it for them, now we want to judge them. We want to judge them and tell them what they should have, could have, would have done. How do we have that conversation, look within the lens to recognize, by the grace of God, that could have been me. So let me look through my lens and treat them as I want to be treated.
Yes.
Let me ensure that I am being fair, I am being objective, and try to see it through their lens and where they are in life and how to navigate them down the right path.
So one of the things that I like to say is, and I think I often refer to Dr. Nelson because this is his realm, right? I want us to be very mindful that we can't move forward unless we do some introspective work. Because part of our own issues is I see things based on my own perspective. And I say this to educators, I say this to law enforcement. You can't serve people from your position of privilege. It's impossible, because I may not have been afforded the same things you have been afforded. And you also can't judge me because of what you have lived, right? Because I may have really been in a bad situation for that moment. So I'm big on the teaching that you treat everyone how you would want to be treated. And one of the things that I always say to educators, and I like to teach when I go in and do new recruits for academies, I want you to treat that person that you're dealing with at that moment as though if somebody else were dealing with your family member, how would you want them to treat that person? Because only then can you truly begin to serve people from a position of empathy. Because see, it's so easy for us to point one finger and you got 3 fingers pointing back. Oftentimes, we've made some of the exact same decisions, but for the grace of God, we didn't get caught. Or, let's keep it 100, because of our backstories, because of our privileges, because we know a Dr. Nelson, because I can get on the phone and call a Corliss, because I can call a Paula, I've been placed in certain positions that I can make some phone calls that I didn't have to pay the same price that the person that did not have those contacts ended up going through the system. So to say that we're doing this body of work, I think there's some questions that you got to do for self, because there's some real biases that we carry amongst ourselves that really infringes upon us to truly serve community. And I know right now the buzzword is implicit and explicit bias. Yeah, that's all good and well, but how much real work are we doing on self? Because I can come in and do an implicit bias training and everybody's like, okay, I already heard this. Mm-hmm. We already know this because we've done it so much. But then the reality comes in, can I apply implicit and explicit bias to show why I treat this person that way? Was it taught? Was it learned? Was it developed? Because until you can have these conversations and own up to I have them, all of this is for naught.
Thank you. Thank you. I love what you said, until we can have those conversations, because not having the conversation or even recognizing that we need to have the conversation tends to keep us in the same position that we are in, and we wonder, a year from now, okay, why is this going on? And not only, I want to make sure that our participants are thinking, not only does this apply when you're dealing with those offenders that are going through community corrections, but this applies to the person who has an office next door to you. Okay? How are you treating them? How do you view through your lens, not knowing what their backstories are and what got them to where they are and how they interact and why they do? Having those conversations. So when we look at the year 2020, it's truly been different. And looking through our lenses last year gives us a complete different view than looking through our lenses now. So Dr. Nelson, I'd like to ask you, what do you think explains the current divisive climate within our country? Like, what's really going on? Tell us what's in the root, what's really happening to have us where we are and why we doing what we doing. Because people are out in the streets, people are marching unlike they've never done before, people are coming together across the country. And it's all about looking through their lens, because what they saw last year in 2019 don't look like what's happening in 2020.
Once again, you must remember, I'm a country boy from McCullough County, so God blessed me with the ability to put a hoop in a basket, and therefore I am. So I don't have a silver bullet, but the conversation for me is self-preservation. I think that's a basic human quality and condition. And like I said, these conversations are uncomfortable, but they're needed, they're necessary, and they have to be real. Folk ask me all the time, how do you get from a Barack Obama to a Donald Trump? And I say self-preservation. I understand it clearly. Just as Black folk, whether they knew President Obama's policy or not, the fact that a Black man was able to be the president of the United States and the pride that went with that, the pride that goes with that, that was clear and evident. That's self-preservation. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. President Trump, you have poor white folk in the mountains of the Appalachian Mountains, Kentucky, that once again, whether they are privileged or not, they have children that they are watching a changing demographic of America. 20 years, America will be majority minority. Where do my kids fit in that America? The angst, the reservations that they have, that's real. And we have to accept that. I mean, I want everything for my children as well. So you have those two. The problem is when it's bastardized, when we're willing to hold a group of people, whether it's because they're Democrats, whether it's because they're LGBT, whether it's because they're whatever group we're willing to hold down to raise us or someone else up, that's bastardized. That's not who we are when we say collective efficacy. Because in America, where everyone has, quote, a level playing field or start from, that's what we strive to be. And we don't have to hold anyone down because everyone started at the race at the exact same place and can move forward. But we're not there as American or Americans. So that conversation of self-preservation and understanding where folk are coming from, whether it's right or wrong, just understanding that at the end of the day, I want the same damn thing any and every one of us on this call want for my kids, my family, my community. We all start there. The problem, once again, is when it's bastardized and being divisive help one group to benefit over other. Whether that's my privilege as a college-educated black man, or whether that's someone else's privilege of being a white female or black female. Or if you were to go back into a serious conversation and look how America was built and the wealth that America accumulated on free labor. See, that's what I'm saying. It's too many conversations, but let's start here. So we'll start here. The here and now is how collectively can we recognize that differences do matter, but our common humanity matters more. And when we can work from there, I think we're better off. But for someone to say, I don't see race, I don't see gender, well, shit, you just missed me. You just missed this country boy from one color if you don't see all of them, because that's who I am and that makes me. Now, it doesn't make me any better. It may make me different, but it doesn't make me deficient. Those are the conversations that we have to have to move this forward. And when someone, you're racist, you're sexist, you come in to fight. So whenever I'm doing training, I start with our commonality. We all want safe, nurturing environment to raise our family. Let's work from there. So, like I said, it's a difficult conversation and 2 hours won't get it, but this is our life work. So whatever amount of time I have left on this earth, this is what it is, because it's not about me at this point. It's my seed. That they don't have to have these conversations anymore.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Because when we look at today, going on right now in DC is the March on Washington. The I Have a Dream speech. 57 years ago, Dr. King and others were having the same conversation, recognizing our difference, demanding equality, and here we are in 2020, still talking about some of the same issues. As we said at the beginning of our session, we wanted to make sure this was engaging. So we want to now start having some questions and some dialogue with our participants out in the audience. So I think we have a few questions already that are in the queue.
Yes, Ms. Hoisington, thank you. I'll go ahead and I'll throw this one out. It touches on what Dr. Nelson was just speaking about. The question is, what strategies can be used to speak with someone that insists that they don't see color, just people? And Ms. Hoisington, I'll let you direct that to the panelists.
Let's start with Dr. Planton. I think we have you muted. Okay.
So on this one, I'm going to have to agree 100% with Dr. Nelson. If you say to me that we don't see color, because one of the very first things that we receive when we're born is the ability to see color, right? Because you may not be able to speak, but your eyes begin, at first you see just black and white, just like cats and dogs, and then you develop the ability to see all these colors. So I think we're coming from a position of, now if y'all want me to keep it real, we're going to keep it real. I think we're coming from a position of falsity to say, I don't see color. Because before you see my knowledge, before I open my mouth, before I tell you where I come from, before my accent kicks in, before my kinky hair, the first thing you see is the color of my skin. And naturally, your trained eye, whether it was developed, whether it was your biases, for lack of better terms, will force you to immediately judge me by which you see. Now, you may give me a pass on certain things because of how I speak. You may give me a pass on certain things because I may connect with you based on where you come from, I come from, we may be from similar islands, or you feel we have shared lived experiences. That's cool. But the initial thing that you see is the fact that I'm a Black female, and everything else will come into place after that. So I think if the person is serious about moving the needle, we need to admit, I see Randy Nelson and I see a Black man. Simple as that. I see, anybody else, I see Paula, I see a Black woman. Paula may be an African American, I may be a Jamaican American, I may be a Haitian American, but all that is secondary. What I see is a Black woman. And the same thing as if I were Hispanic. Same thing is going to happen if I was Muslim. Same thing is going to happen if I was Indian. What you see initially is what you were going based on your biases, those lens. Now, afterwards, you may adjust the lens because you got to know me. You may have gotten to respect me a little bit more. But that initial lens that you haven't zoomed in yet, that first snapshot says, I see a Black woman. So it's almost impossible. And I think Dr. Nelson said it best. Well, shit, you just missed me, because this is who I am. I'm in front of you, a Black woman, a Black man, and what's happening in the streets is clearly because the view of a simple Black man says so much to so many people based on their lens.
Thank you. Thank you. Any of our other panelists want to weigh in? Corliss?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One thing about the color of our skin is, and this is linking information with history. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The one thing about our color of our skin is that the reason African Americans became the #1 product to be traded in the slave industry, because before African Americans were the product for slavery, there were also whites or indentured servants. But because the indentured servants who were white were able to hide within the community when they ran away, then that's when the decision was made to have African Americans with the color of their skin, identifying them as slaves. So over time, that's how people see us, as African Americans, because the color of your skin is black. Now, there is also, you cannot look at people and see the color of their skin today because of interracial mixing and everything else. You might think someone is African American or black, and they may not be black. And so, there are a lot of disparities. So when you look at a person, the first thing you see is the color of their skin. Don't make prejudgments. Don't assume one way or the other. Because they will surprise you when they start talking to you, and the conversation that you will have, and you will be embarrassed, quite frankly, when you speak with some people. So just keep that in mind, and know that if you are living on, I'm colorblind, you're telling me right away, I don't even recognize who you are.
Thank you. And not only, when we look at, people say they don't see color, and, I don't see color, I just see the person. Okay, yeah, like Dr. Nelson said, then you don't see me. But also in that same vein, the names.
Yes.
People are discriminated against based on their name.
Yes.
Because my name may be difficult to pronounce, you may not even go as far as to look at what my credentials are to see what I bring to the table. So we have to also be aware of that. Let's go to our next question.
Okay, next question. Do you think it would be a good idea to start having meaningful and open conversations with people that we serve in community corrections and not just staff?
Do we think that it would be beneficial to have questions
Yeah, I'll reread it. It says, do you think it would be a good idea to start having meaningful and open conversation with people that we serve? I take it in community corrections with our audience and not just our staff.
Okay. Dr. Nelson, you want to take that one?
No, I think that's true. A lot of the training that I do with law enforcement, I'll go in and train law enforcement first on the history of law enforcement and why is it that some communities are mistrustful, fearful, or just don't want to have anything to do with law enforcement other than someone steal my car, come find who stole it and get the hell out. Law enforcement need to understand that history because they come in, I want to help, I'm here to serve and protect, and the community is looking at them, some communities, with a jaundiced eye. And there's a reason and a history for that. And a 22-year-old law enforcement officer, whether he's black, white, or yellow, wouldn't understand that and don't know that history. So I think that the second part of the training is exactly what the individual asked. We'll put on jeans and tennis shoes and go into the heart of the city, particularly the high crime communities, and have a conversation about their role and responsibility in holding law enforcement accountable, but also holding the community accountable. Someone shot 3 o'clock broad daylight and no one saw anything. That's not the police, that's you. How can we have a conversation about two-way accountability? Holding law enforcement accountable, because let's be honest, law enforcement has the power to take life and liberty. The President of the United States doesn't have that power. So anyone that has that type of power to take life should be held to a higher standard. The only profession I think that should be held equally in terms of that standard are teachers. The teachers can kill dreams. And sometimes that's just as deadly to an individual and a community. So those conversations are needed and necessary, but whoever asked that question is absolutely right. Those same conversations have to have, whether it's a community correction clients or residential. We're all collectively, as Dr. Plant said, we the people. We the people includes all the ex-offender as well as the CEO of Walmart. We the people, all the people. But yeah, those conversations need to be had in the community, whether it's training or whatever. It's a collective efficacy. All hands on deck. Everyone's required, and everyone has to have a place and a space and a voice.
Thank you. Dr. Plain, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I'd like to take it one step further than Dr. Nelson, is because community corrections is serving people and you have them in a particular position where there are certain things that they have to do. This is a perfect opportunity to really engage them in these conversations. And because, again, that collective change, it has to come from within us. So there are some trainings that we mandate for them to do. Sometimes it's NA courses, sometimes it's anger management courses. This may be a course about understanding whatever we're going to call it to make it more palatable for some people, but this may be an opportunity for us to truly begin to help folks not only rehabilitate, but truly reintegrate as we collectively try to succeed, right? Because you're in this world and in this space right now where, yes, people are looking at how do we create reform? And a lot of times we're not doing the listening, we're just doing the dictating. So yes, creating spaces where we can not just dictate, but also giving the people that we serve through community corrections an opportunity to have a voice may in turn well serve community corrections as a whole, because there's some things that we can learn by people who've actually gone through it, not just by people who serve them.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, next question. How do we assist others that we believe suffer from bias? Very, very straightforward question there.
How do we assist others that we believe are biased?
How do we assist others that we believe suffer from bias?
Who wants to take that one? Dr. Flanton?
want to be very clear on this, because if someone says, how do we serve someone who we know is biased? Let us start the conversation by establishing that we are all biased, period. Whether you show it explicitly or you do it implicitly by deciding I'm not going to sit by them Hispanic people because I don't like them, that's a bias. And I like to make it palatable for folks. If you like cheese pizza over pepperoni, it's a bias, folks. And it's easy because folks, you know, can say, I don't like that because I just don't like the taste. It's a bias. I like to work with my own kind. I ain't going to work with the others. It's a bias. So it's not just the other person has a bias. Oftentimes we realize they have a bias because we got our own biases. So I think the question by itself really forces us to do some introspective look of, yeah, they got a bias. Maybe I should check my own biases out.
Exactly.
That's my opinion.
I love that. I often say sometimes it's like Michael Jackson's song, I'm talking to the man in the mirror, I'm asking him to change his ways. So like you said, we all have biases regardless of what they are. We all have biases. So check yourself.
I like the way
That's the woman in the mirror.
Yeah.
And look, it was coming back at you.
Yeah.
Corliss?
I like to say that we need to be careful that when it comes to equal treatment, we need to be looking at evidence based on investigations, not stereotypes and not biases, because it could lead us in the wrong direction. If you're dealing with a bias, and I believe that Dr. Planton said this perfectly, that's time for self-examination.
Thank you. Do we have another question, Michael?
Yes, we do. This question is put forth, and it asks for each panelist participation. Could you provide 1 to 2 practices that leadership in organizations can implement to ensure inclusiveness, equity, representation at the table? Ms. Hoisington, I'll let you take it from there with each panelist.
Okay, let's start with Dr. Nelson.
So practices. We're currently working in a project with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. And like I said, it's a small start, but similar to what I said earlier, we start with the leadership. So everyone in their leadership, from the sheriff down to the captain. So we did the leadership first, having the understanding of why is it that certain communities are fearful or distrustful of you. All of you in this room, why is that? Then the next round, we went to the patrol officers, the ones that are actually on the street, same conversation. And then the next, we went out to the community and had the conversation with the community. Why is it that you think police officers would be afraid, or their view of you, their perception? What are some of the things that you think influence that? And then we brought select individuals from the leadership of the sheriff's office, from patrol, as well as community stakeholders. And you don't do that without having the conversation first about let each other see each other's perspective. Because I don't do town hall meetings because everyone comes in and they start going past, talking past each other, and you never get anything accomplished. But if I can have a conversation with law enforcement first about why it is that communities see them the way they do, and then vice versa with the community, then bring both groups together, because we're going to start from, once again, the commonality that we want a safe and nurturing environment to raise our family. So that being the case, it was something that came up earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and get this plug in on bias. I would be lying to you if I told you as a black male, if I were to pull over a white male in Wakulla County where I live that had a swastika tattoo on his forehead, a Confederate flag on his back windshield, I would be lying to you if I told you that I didn't have a perception or view of who I think he is. I would be lying to you. I would be lying to you if I told you that in Miami, I would have pulled over a black male with dreads, saggy pants, spinning wheels with a gold grill. I would be lying to you as a black male if I told you that I didn't have a perception of who I think that person was. If I would have put over a black male or white male with khaki pants, clean cut, although they may be just as dangerous, my perception of them would be different. So when we talk about biases, I think we have to recognize that we all have them, based on our lived and shared experiences. The problem with corrections and law enforcement and other professions, your biases can't dictate your actions. Your actions have to be predicated on what someone did or did not do. It can't be, I've seen this person before and therefore my perception of them is this. It has to be based solely on the action that you're dealing with there and so on and so forth. So that's my little spiel on bias. But in terms of strategies, I think anytime you can have the conversation we're having now, the unfortunate part of this is a 2-hour conversation that needs to be had every month for 8 hours in most professions, from teaching to law enforcement to any other profession. So that's the problem, that these conversations typically happen after a George Floyd or Jacob Blake. That's when we have these conversations, and it doesn't lead to growth. It just leads to that you're going to have these conversations, and it's not a matter of if something's going to happen again. It's a matter of when. And then, hey, Dr. Nelson, can you get on a 2-hour conversation? Yeah, I'll do it, but you have to promise me you're going to continue to work after we finish this 2-hour conversation.
Right.
Thank
I
you.
like to weigh in on that one. And I agree with Dr. Nelson. One of the first things we would need to do would be to take a survey to determine the shortcomings of that agency. And, you know, you take a survey from the community, you take a survey from your staff, and you compile those things together. And the one thing that I know that a lot of agencies are guided by are policies and procedures. And those things cannot be necessarily violated or changed initially. There are things that can be worked on for change, but initially they have to be supported. Now, the whatever comes up out of the survey, we can still look at those things and not justify our wrongdoings based on our ideas of the policy and procedures. We need to be clear, as Dr. Planton says, that what we are doing is equal to everyone involved and not just picking and choosing how we deal with situations individually.
Thank you. Dr. Planton, you want to weigh in?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think the person asked for some, for some strategies that I'd like to give them a couple of. One, the creation of maybe a panel of employees that are rotated often to ensure that, it's, again, we the people. It's not just administration, but you're getting people from within the system, within the institution. They're serving, they're being the voice. People want to be heard, people want to be seen. And the best way to understand what folks are going through is to give them the opportunity to be heard and seen. So a creation of a panel that represents the people of that institution is one of the ways to do that. Secondly, I'm going to hearken on what both Corliss and Dr. Nelson said. These cannot be just one-time conversations or in the event of ad hoc conversations. Maybe the institution of not even once a year, quarterly implementation trainings of looking at what do our policies really reflect, and are we inclusive of everyone who's within the institution when we look at our policies. Because oftentimes when we're looking at our policies, we're looking at them from a perspective of those at the top, right? The decision makers. But a lot of times those policies really are not inclusive of the people that are doing the work. So maybe just giving them some working sessions to say, here are our policies. What do you think we can do better, right? And then implementing trainings around what they want to understand, issues they want to address. And because we're doing the third one is because this is community corrections, I would definitely implement an exit evaluation for the people exiting from community corrections. Why? They're going to give you some hardcore, what I went through with the person I dealt with the most, how I felt, how I was treated, really. And these evaluations they need to be, again, addressing some of these hard conversations. Do you think you were treated differently because of who you were? Do you think you were treated differently because of just really honing in on things that will then come back once they're looked at to say, how can we better the institution? How can we better serve the people we're serving? But more importantly, how can we as an institution, we the people, ensure that what we put out, we can be proud of it every single day because it is representative of the people that we serve?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mike, do we have a couple of more questions?
Yes. Next question. How do we discuss or approach a coworker that you have witnessed being biased or even racist toward an offender or even to other coworkers?
Corliss, would you like to take that one?
Yes, absolutely. The first thing, when you are approaching an employee or someone who has been accused of whatever it is, you might want to have them replay whatever the situation was. And from that replay, as they give you the information, you might want to just ask them how would they feel about whatever it is that they are describing. Now, the one thing that we have to all be careful of is that when employees are talking to management, if that is the scenario that's going on, or even if they're just talking to another coworker about what is going on, they've already reviewed whatever it is, and they kind of know the real answer to what they should say. However, even though they know the real answer as to what they should say, we should not immediately tag them with whatever it is that we think happened about, okay, you were biased, or we shouldn't accuse them of the situation. We should just let them have their say about whatever it is that they're trying to explain to us. And then we should inquire, you know, why did you go in that direction? What was your justification? How did you feel about the decision that you made? You know, even if we even ask them, would you do it in that same vein again? Sometimes people will admit, they may admit their faults, not necessarily all the time, but they might come honest with you based on how you approach the situation. And I think that's key with us as managers, employees talking to one another. We can't be accusatory and we can't be the judge and the jury. We have to come from a kind of an understanding point of view and then try to work from the back door in. That's just my take on how to deal.
I think we have a couple of more questions from our audience, but before we get into those questions, I want to direct these two questions to Dr. Nelson and Dr. Planton. And I want us to talk a little bit about criminal justice reform. There's a lot of discussion and panels and, you know, defund the police and criminal justice reform and what does that mean? What does that look like? So Dr. Nelson, starting with you, I'd like for you to talk to us about the community's role in criminal justice reform. And then when he finishes with his discussion on that, Dr. Planton, I'd like for you to talk to us about what is it meant beyond diversity within the criminal justice system. Dr. Nelson?
Criminal justice reform it's big. So what I'm going to do in this shortness of time is get to the left toenail of the frog. So I'll just get to police as a part of the overall reform. But with police, I think the community's role is twofold for me. The first is most times we see the flare-ups and most riots in America, in terms, if you look at the history of America, most of the large-scale riots were the direct result of a police action. I'm not saying the action was warranted, justified. Most of the major riots, you do your work, in the history of America, most of the major riots were a direct result of police action. With that understanding, I think that the community's role with respect to police reform is twofold. One, in terms of recruiting. In the Black community, the Black church has and will always be a bedrock of that community. When we're having conversations in the Black church about children going on to be doctors, lawyers, teachers, law enforcement needs to be a part of that conversation. It's a noble profession in and of itself. Even with the history of law enforcement, if you were to take every racist police officer, probation officer out of the criminal justice system, you will still have crime and high levels of crime in a lot of the communities that we're talking about. So first and foremost is either you get what they give you or you be a part of finding the talented, the best and the brightest, because the power that they have to take life or liberty needs to be just as diverse in terms of the agencies and those that are patrolling communities. I don't prescribe that every officer in the Black community should be a Black officer, but every officer in that community should have the best interests of that community. And once again, that community is we the people. On the other side of that is law enforcement. I think law enforcement need to do a better job of serving as gatekeepers in terms of who they allow into the profession. Because no matter how few, you got bad apples in every organization, sorority, fraternity. No matter how few bad apples, the damage that they can do in law enforcement, taking life or liberty, is at a whole nother level. So they need to do a better job of that. The other part, I believe in unions, whether it's corrections unions, law enforcement. I believe as a democracy and in a democratic society, having folk advocate and be advocates is fine. What I don't agree with is defending the indefensible. When you have either a teachers union or a police union that are defending people that don't represent the standard of the profession or we the people, you can't defend that. There's no defending the indefensible. So from that perspective, I think with the reform, one is not only the training and who you allow in the profession, but the Black communities as well, in terms of the actual crime that occur in community, even if you took out the racists. I think that there's a serious conversation there. And some of it gets to the economic inequalities and all that. But once again, I was born poor. You can't get any poor. My dad had a 9th grade education, but every report card period, I had to put my report card on the desk. He couldn't help me with algebra. He couldn't help me, but he made sure that I gave my all and I gave my best and nothing else was acceptable to him. So I think as a community, collectively as a community, even with all of the disparities, it's not lost on me that 99.9% of the low performing schools in Florida are located in and serve minority communities. So that is with the backdrop that there are still a lot of inequities. But I think the community's responsibility is to ensure, just like my dad did, in spite of all of that, until they get that right, you're going to be the best and the brightest, and you're going to put forth, you're going to compete. We have to have all of those conversations at a community level, but that doesn't take away from the need from whether it's Department of Corrections, juvenile justice, or police, that we the people, and your best, your effectiveness, and whatever strategy, practice you use should be equitable and void of any decision based on race, creed, color, anything else. So it's a long conversation, but that's where I would go when we're talking about reform and the community responsibility and role in that reform.
Thank you. Dr. Planton?
So the question was for me, beyond diversity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I say that, I think it's important for us to look at a couple of things. Diversity, as I said earlier, is only the beginning point. It's funny that we're even still having these conversations about diversity, because there was a time when diversity was the in thing. Everybody was throwing around the word diversity. Everybody wanted to be diverse. And then once we got to a point where we knew how to protect ourselves from liability because we had the word diverse, we stopped. So diversity needs to be more than just on a sheet of paper. It needs to be reflected in the policies and procedures of the organization. It needs to be reflected in the standard operating procedures. It needs to be reflected in the handbooks, the employee manuals. And again, not a one-pager, not a simple line, but really breaking down how important, and someone put it in the chat, we need to give the importance. People need to know that diversity, equity, respect, inclusion, that those things are the bedrock upon which these institutions are created. Because if not, again, I say, then it is all for naught, because you're serving a community and the community is diverse. The community is looking for respect. So all of these things are what the community is asking for. So how can you serve community if those are not the bedrock upon which your institution stands on? The second thing is, diversity is a nice word, but the only time I really care, and those of us that do this work about diversity, is your funding. One of the things my grandparents used to always say to me, don't trust nothing nobody tell you unless they show you where they're willing to put their money. Put your money where your mouth is, because at the end of the day, you can tell me you diverse till you turn blue. But when I look at your budget, your annual budget, how diverse is that? What are you implementing in your institution to help promote diversity, to help promote equity, to help promote inclusion? And what's an example of that? What are new trainings? We become so comfortable with the trainings we have, we're afraid of going outside to bring in some new trainings that may challenge the status quo. Some new trainings that may say, maybe we ain't doing it too right, because by saying that, that's it. Instantly we become defensive, because if somebody comes in and says, you may want to relook at this, that, you take that personal. So you saying I'm not doing a good job? You saying administration isn't doing a good job? Again, we need to remove the individual and begin to look at the collective. The third thing that I would say is reform is a result of, so all this reform that people are talking about, if we're going to talk about going beyond diversity, as we address, and we have these 2-hour conversations, and hopefully we'll continue with these conversations after we're gone, but then you've got to go back and look at, what do I need to reform? And reform means change. And part of that change goes, again, your policies and procedures. Where am I funding? What am I funding? Who am I funding? And then lastly, this cannot be a one-all be-all, right? The same way that we prepare for accreditations, the same way we prepare to ensure, your licensing, you sit for your licensing and you want to make sure that it's up to date. Your policies as it relates to diversity, your policies as it relates to equity, your policies as it relates to inclusion and diversity, it has to be looked upon. Accountability, and I think Dr. Nelson has said this several times today, you got to hold your own self accountable. The same way we're asking for police to be held accountable, we're asking for community to be held accountable. These institutions, as far as the criminal justice system, need to hold themselves accountable to look at, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And then do it on a regular basis. Because once you get it, that got it right now doesn't mean a year from now it's going to still be applicable. Because if you did it last year, going back to Paula's point in 2019, and look at everything that has happened in 2020, that would say to me that what you did last year is insufficient for this year and the needs of where we are as a people in the community this year. So we need to get out of this mindset that the minute I say diversity and I put it on a sheet of paper on black and white, it's legal, it's official, it's done. No, because you need to come back and revisit it. Same way you revisit policies and procedures for accreditation to maintain your accreditation, you need to do the exact same thing, not for your accreditation, but for the people who are part of this institution to believe that I still matter. You still have my back, and who I am still matters to the success of this entity.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael, do we have any other questions from the audience?
Yes, ma'am. Next question. If we treat our coworker different based on the color of their skin, is it possible to treat the individual that we supervise in the community or institutions based on the color of their skin? This question comes from the chat here just a few moments ago.
Dr. Nelson?
It's small sound bites, so it's hard to get into a conversation. this race issue, and I know because of the climate we're in, but we can have the same conversation about gender, about religion, so on and so forth. So it's all the same conversation. But one of the things that folk talk about now is procedural justice, and the tenets of procedural justice is voice, fairness, impartiality, and transparency. As an organization, whether it's the Florida Association of Community Correction Professionals, whether it's the Department of Correction, whether it's the police, I think you have to have both internal and external conversation with regard to voice, fairness, impartiality, and transparency. Because if I'm working for the Department of Correction, as I did in 1989, as an agency, I have to have a voice. As one of the thousands of employees, I have to feel that I have a voice. I have to feel that the process, whether it's the hiring process, the promotion process, that is fair. I have to feel that it's impartial. I mean, there isn't someone at the circuit office choosing this person because that's a friend's friend. And there has to be transparency. Whatever decisions we make, that they're transparent and that you can see. Now, some decisions that I knew that were made when I was working with corrections way back when, so it doesn't indict anybody, were based on friendships. Now, you can have decisions that are based on this person going to this office, this community. So you can make decisions that aren't always black and white. But I think they have to be transparent, that you have to be able to articulate that. And articulation can't be, is a friend's daughter. So that's for internal. External, with the community, the same conversation. They have to have a voice. They got to feel that they're being treated fairly. The impartiality, the transparent, same thing, that they need to be, the community needs to be transparent, that whatever's happening in the community, in terms of safety, we have a role and responsibility in this. So it can't be, if someone steals my car, I'll call the police, but if they steal my neighbor's car, that's on them. I don't have nothing to do with it. All of that accountability and transparency is internal and external. So that's where we have to have that conversation. But the race piece, I think it weaves throughout, but you could take out race, put in gender, take out this, put in that. So you'll have that conversation. But once again, it's just hard to have those conversations in 2 or 3 minute sound bites.
Thank you. Dr. Planton, did you have any comments on that?
I want to be careful with the verbiage that was utilized in that question, that if I have to treat my, a fellow colleague different because of the color of their skin. And I'm hoping that that's not what we're putting out, because that's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is understand that the color of that person's skin carries some backstories and causes them to do what they do, behave how they behave, because it's a part of who they are. We're definitely not asking to be treated any different because I'm Black, or to be treated any different, like Dr. Nelson said, because I'm woman, or to be treated any different because I'm Jewish. No, but what we're saying is acknowledge that because of those very similar characteristics that are very apparent in front of us, they carry baggages that must be acknowledged in order to properly understand who we are, so that together we can work and understand one another for the advancement of the better good of we the people, but not asking to be treated different because of the color of our skin.
Thank you.
And the thing I like to add to that is, and that's what has gotten some of the law enforcement in the trouble that we are experiencing today, because they're looking at a person's skin, they're making decisions about how they should respond to the individual instead of dealing with the specific evidence that would support their whatever decision they make. And a lot of times, well, I'm not going to say a lot of times, we would not even be having this discussion if people were not judged based on the color of their skin, because it wouldn't end up the way things are ending up. So, and I agree with Dr. Planton and Dr. Nelson, don't look at the person's skin color to determine if I'm going to be, treat them with civility and respect. We should just treat them with civility and respect because they are human.
Thank you. Michael, any other?
Yes, got another question here. Another question from the chat from a few moments ago. And I believe this is, the chat indicated this was to Dr. Nelson, but of course this is to the panel as the moderator sees fit. Help me understand why you describe yourselves as African American. I describe, and this is the submitter, I describe myself as American. My descent is from Italy.
Dr. Nelson?
That's just a history lesson. I just think, and let's be honest, if in terms of raising my 12-year-old and my 19-year-old, I just raised them to be American. And that's what they are, American. And I send them out to the world as you are an American. And they come back to me and say, why is it that the Americans that's always unarmed and killed look like me and sound like me? Is there something different? Is there a different type of America? I would be less than a father not to educate them and prepare them for what the world is, not for what I want it to be. The other part of that conversation is the history of America must be and fully revealed to everyone, because the good, the bad, and the indifferent, we're still the shining hill. But that shining hill came with a price. And for us not to understand and recognize that price, it'll lead us back to where it started. So failure to know your history will revert to you repeating your history. So by me saying I'm an African American, that's no slight to any European or anyone else. I'm an African American. I'm proud of both. The lived, the shared history, I'm proud of both. I don't have to choose one of the other. And I am an American all day, every day, and don't want to be anywhere else. But that doesn't mean that I have to set aside the struggle of African Americans that were brought to America. So that's a part of the divide. When we have to divide, I don't think is a plus. It's this and that, not this or that.
Thank you. Dr. Planton, did you want to weigh in on this?
I want to add another layer to that, is because as we're having this conversation, we're making it seem, and I'm hoping that that's not what's coming across, so I'm going to add another layer. I myself am Haitian American. I wasn't born in Haiti, but my family is from Haiti. I'm Haitian all day, and I'm American all day. So when we're talking about diversity, we also need to respect that everyone isn't going to be American. Number one, 100% American. And then two, we need to respect too that folks want that identity because this is who I am. I shouldn't have to pick to be American because it makes you happy. No, I may choose to be Italian American. I may choose to be Hispanic American. I may choose to be African American. But a lot of it is about that identity because there are histories behind that. There are struggles that came along with those titles and who we are and those identities. So to just say that I have to pick, either I'm going to be all American, Indian American struggles are going to be different, even though they're the real Americans in this land, right? So if we're going to take away the lived experience, the shared experience, the history behind some of these identities, we have to be very careful with that because those struggles determine who I am as a person. My parents, I originate from the first free Black country. So there's a reason why I love to say, although I wasn't born in Haiti, but I understand the struggles that my parents went through to make me who I am today. So I'm always going to give credence to being a Haitian American woman, but I also understand the history of what was given so that me as a young Black woman can be in the spaces that I am today. I'm always going to give credence to being an American woman. So again, there are stories that come with these identities. So it's not a label as much as it is ensuring that my identity is not lost in a system where they're trying to make us want either this or that.
Thank you. Corliss, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, I do want to weigh in on that because my nationality came from Spain to Cuba and then to Florida. And so if I were to say who I am as an individual, it would be Cuban American because that's my lineage. However, I think James Brown liberated us when I was coming up, when he said, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud." I'm Black and I'm proud meant so much to the African American people at that time because they were told who they would be. But no, once we started selecting who we would identify with when we didn't know, it made you more of who you are finally. This is the product of who I am based on what I grew up and my grandparents and my parents taught me to put my own stamp of approval on who I am and not allow other people to determine who I am. And so that's who I am. The person that gave the question identified where they came from and how they see themselves. They put that tag on themselves. So, and this is where equality comes in at. When it comes to diverse conversations, we spend a lot of time trying to find out from other races who put that tag on you. Why can't you do what we do? Well, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to be the people who we are and say, look at me, this is who I am, this is who I choose to be. And I put my own stamp of approval on who I am. And so when you do that and when you allow a person to understand their history and put their own tag on, well, they bloom and they're so much better a product than trying to live under the expectations of others, because I don't have everybody else's experiences. I don't have everybody else's expectations. And so when I try to live under those expectations, I'm going to mess up and I'm going to do the wrong thing. So allow people to be who they are and then accept that and move on.
Thank you. Mike, do we have any other questions?
Yes, we got one final question, and then we're coming up on the closing of the webinar. So move this forward. Last question. Do you think that an agency or organization that lacks diversity at a leadership level can fairly represent or be a true representation of those who are being led? Let me repeat that. Do you think that an agency or organization that lacks diversity at a leadership level can fairly...
Otherwise, just press pound to continue. You are in the meeting now. There are more than 160 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded. You are muted. You can mute or unmute yourself by pressing *6. You have been put on hold by the host.
Hi, sorry, everyone.
There we go. Okay, I'm going to try it one more time, Ms. Hoisington. Then after that, the moderator and the panelist, you'll need to unmute. Do you think that an agency or organization that lacks diversity at a leadership level can fairly represent or be a true representation of those who are being led?
Who'd like to take that one?
I'll start it off and then throw it over to Dr. Nelson. We're going to tag team Dr. Nelson. Okay. As I said earlier in my opening, I am a firm believer that if you are not representative of we the people, then you cannot serve we the people. That is exactly why this country, our entire Constitution, the documents upon which we were founded, right? That is why we have representation. The number of people who are represented in our census dictates the number of representation we get in the House of Representatives. That is why that is why we have representation in the Senate, because you are voting for people who you believe or you feel at the time they were campaigning, said that they were in your best interest. Now, what happens when they get in there is a whole nother ballgame and another conversation. So it is the same exact thing in the place that you work. And I'm going to say it again. If your leadership is only made up of a certain group of the who's who, then everybody else who's working under you, the policies that are made, the decisions that are made, what you fund, where you fund, the trainings, every decision that is made, your procedures, everything that is done is being seen through the lens of that leadership, which then results to an entire group of people who feel as though they are not represented, they don't have a voice, they're not being heard, and they're not being seen. Nothing is more detrimental in an institution where the people that work for that institution does not feel heard, does not feel understood, does not feel valued for what they bring to the table, but more importantly, does not believe they are truly represented by the people who are at the top. Tag team.
There you go. We're done. When we're talking about the public square, kind of like Dr. Plain is talking, diversity is a must. It's we the people. If you're talking about an organization like my fraternity, we're not going to bring in a black female to lead my fraternity. So when we're talking the public square like we are today, absolutely. And it's both internal and external. Voice, fairness, impartiality, transparency. Internal, the folk that works for the organization, from the secretary down to the CPO1, or if we're talking about in the community, from the business owner down to the 8-year-old that's in school. And each one of them have to feel voice, fairness, impartiality, and transparency. So the conversation we're talking about today, yes, diversity is a must. It has to be if it's we the people. Anything less is just we without the people. So that part is good. But once again, when we're talking about different organizations, associations, it's different.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for, I'm sorry?
I'd like to weigh in on that.
Okay.
If I can. I'll take 2 minutes. When I look around of whatever agency that I'm a part of, and I can feel like whatever comes down the pipe addresses the diversity of the agency, and I can look around and see that diversity is there, I know that the people at the top has my best interest at heart because I can see it and I can feel it. So it's important that those items are looked at, reviewed, and implemented.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, for such a dynamic dialogue and conversation. I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds with your closing remarks, closing words that we want to leave with the panel, with our audience. Dr. Nelson?
My 30 seconds is, if you're ever in Wakulla County, look me up. Once again, I think this conversation is needed and necessary, but 2 hours a year won't get it. We're gonna have to find ways to ingrain this through all agencies, from school systems to criminal justice to every facet of human life. Individual domain, family domain, community domain, school, education, employment. These conversations are needed and necessary because it gets us not just talking about it, because everyone can have these conversations. The next part of that, and I think Dr. Planton mentioned it before, is the action. What are we going to do about it? So I don't mind having these conversations, but at some point, it has to be beyond having these conversations and actually putting forth some actions to make sure, once again, it's about our seed, that we don't have to have these conversations 20, 30 years from now because we're doing the work.
Thank you. Dr. Planton?
I think as we commemorate the 57th anniversary of the march and the I Have a Dream, I think one of the things that we want to remember is that Dr. King said there will be a day, and I'm paraphrasing, where his children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. It's funny that today we're having the exact same conversation about whether or not people should be judged by the color of their skin, where they come from, how they look, all of that takes away from us really truly engaging people with the content of their character. So as we have these conversations, my takeaway, as I hope, is that one, we understand that the only way we move forward is by relating to one another, understanding that we all have biases, we all have our own lived experience. And if I can try to relate and walk in your shoes, at least try, I can attempt to connect. Second is to really connect and see people as human beings with dignity, respect, so that we can begin to treat one another as we want to be treated. But more importantly, I think we have lost the sense of empathy when we work with other people from the top down, the decisions that we make, the policies we put into place. Let us ensure that they're not just benefiting, the few, those of us that we like, those that look a particular way, but ensuring that all of us, all of the people that are part of the institution can relate, can connect to the policies, the spending, the budget, the whole 9 yards, so that truly we can empathize when we're serving the people in the community. At the end of the day, until we begin to mitigate the individualistic mindset and begin to truly and wholeheartedly embrace we the people, we will collectively continue to have these conversations, and we will collectively be having the same situations we're seeing that's happening across this country.
Thank you. Corliss?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank FACC for putting on this wonderful training, taking the first step to have this conversation. They could have done any other types of training, but they chose this at a very crucial and important time in history. So I want to thank FACC for that. At least it's a great start. The community or the participants have a responsibility as the community. Agencies have a responsibility. Upper management has a responsibility. And I believe it will be crucial for all of us to hold each other accountable for our responsibility and put to action some of the discussions that was discussed here today, and to realize that a group is only as good as the unified group is. So when we utilize every diversity that we have in front of us, we will become a wonderful, well-meaning country. Don't look at individuals and point the finger. Let's look at each other and decide, what can I do to make things better? Participate, encourage, and support. The community needs to support. They need to participate, as well as all levels. So that's what I lead today.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for all of our participants for participating today. We hope that we have planted seeds that you can continue to nurture as you navigate your view and how your lens is changing. You, each one of you, have the power today to change tomorrow. As you travel through this new normal, take time to make sure your lens is clear and that your vision is focused. As you move through this new normal, make sure that you take time to check in not only with yourself, but check in with your coworkers, check in with your families, check in with the community, check in with what you do. And know that as we go through life, someone's going to move the lens. Your job is to ensure that you can see clearly. Reach out, get the tools that you need to make sure that your vision is clear and that your direction is the right way. Thank you so much for participating, and I'd like to turn it over to Issa for closing remarks.
Well, I am having so many feelings at the end of these 2 hours. I'm feeling proud of being part of the Florida Association of Community Corrections, and really encouraging these conversations at this moment. I'm feeling incredibly grateful to have been here, to witness this conversation and to learn from this conversation. And I'm feeling courageous as well. I hope that we could all feel courageous to have these conversations in our homes, in our workplace, in our offices, in our communities and institutions. I will invite, our promise, I think, is to continue to share our experiences, but really to invite the experiences of others in so that we could learn, see people for who they are and learn from their experiences and backstories. I really want to thank our incredible panel today and our moderator, Dr. You're the chairperson of so much. Reading your bio made me tired. I'm only on a few boards and I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you all do it. I am incredibly grateful again to all of you for giving of your time and giving to our field. Thank you very much, everyone. The next and final part 3 of the series will be September 25th. Presenters from the Department of Justice Civil Rights will look at how we can build trust and legitimacy. I encourage you, and we will soon send out the information for part 3. Save the date for September 25th. Thank you again to everyone who participated today. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.